You know, usually when we look at an everyday object, especially one as perfect and globally iconic as the violin,
Right.
there's this underlying, almost desperate expectation of a eureka moment.
Oh, absolutely.
Like we want that Thomas Edison and the light bulb story, you know?
We want it to be simple.
Exactly. We want Alexander Graham Bell and the telephone. You picture some brilliant, isolated artisan sitting in this dusty, sunlit workshop somewhere in Italy.
Just waiting for inspiration.
Right. Lightning strikes their brain. They sketch out this flawless blueprint. They carve the foot and boom.
Instrument is born.
The instrument is born, perfectly formed, and history is forever changed. But that's not exactly how it happened.
No, it is not. It is. It's the great myth of the lone genius. And you're right, it's incredibly pervasive because it is just so binary and clean.
Yeah.
We love a straightforward origin story, right? With a specific inventor we can name, a specific date we can memorize.
Not a spot on a map.
Exactly, a specific location we can point to. Our brains are practically hardwired to seek out those neat, comforting historical narratives.
They really are. But then you step into the world of Renaissance instrument making, and suddenly that clean historical timeline just shatters.
It completely falls apart.
Into a million unrecognizable pieces. You realize you are looking at a historical landscape that is, honestly, it's the absolute definition of muddy waters.
Oh, without a doubt.
There is no blueprint. There is no lightning bolt. There is just this messy, sprawling, centuries-long evolution, and that is exactly what we are going to explore today.
And it is such a fascinating journey.
It really is. So if you're listening right now, pull up a chair and settle in because you are the crucial third member of our conversation today. We are going on a serious historical detective journey.
We really are. And the mystery we're unpacking today is the surprisingly murky origin of the violin family.
And just to clarify, when we say that, what are we including?
All right, so when we say violin family, we are specifically talking about the violin, the viola, and the cello.
Got it.
And we're looking at how they suddenly seem to just emerge out of nowhere in the 16th century.
Like magic.
Right, exactly. And to guide us through this fog, we're drawing heavily from this meticulously researched landmark text. It's Maurice W. Riley's The History of the Viola, Volume 1.
It's an incredible source. So our core mission today is to thoroughly dismantle that romantic myth of the single magical inventor. We're going to guide you through how modern historians actually cracked this case.
And it wasn't easy.
No, they didn't do it by finding some dusty old prototype in a basement.
I wish. That would have been so much easier.
Right. No, they had to use like Renaissance paintings and ancient tax documents.
Yes.
And these really bizarre linguistic clues to reveal how these instruments evolve. And trust me, you are going to want to stick around for the end of this deep dive.
Oh, the ending is the best part.
It is a massive paradigm-shifting realization that's waiting for you. We are going to reveal the very counterintuitive reason why there are so many surviving 16th century violas today.
It's going to blow some minds.
Definitely. And a little hint for you listening. It has absolutely nothing to do with them being beloved or popular.
Not at all.
It has everything to do with them being locked away in dark closets because they were simply too physically excruciating to play.
It's a phenomenal example of how raw historical data can completely mislead us.
Yes.
Until we stop looking at just the numbers and start looking at the human anatomy behind the data.
I love that. But to even get to those locked closets, we have to start at the foundation, right?
We do. For centuries, musicologists have been kept awake at night by three great mysteries surrounding this family of instruments.
Okay, lay them out for us.
Number one, where and exactly when did the violin family originate?
Classic where and when.
Exactly. Number two, who were the very first luthiers, the master stringed instrument makers, to actually craft them?
Right, the who.
And number three, which has sparked some of the most heated academic debates in musicology.
Oh, yeah.
Did the viola actually come before the violin?
Okay, that third question is the heavyweight title fight.
It really is.
And we will definitely get there. But let's start with those first two questions. The who, the where, and the when.
Sounds good.
For the longest time, history books essentially offered us a lineup of, I guess you'd call them usual suspects for the grand title of violin inventor.
Yeah, it was like a multiple choice question on a history test.
Right. Candidate A was Gaspar de Salo. He was a highly respected maker operating out of Brescia in northern Italy.
Very famous.
Right. Then candidate B was Gaspar Duifo Brugkar. the French contender who was based over in Lyon.
Also a major player.
And then candidate C was Andrea Amati, hailing from the legendary instrument-making city of Cremona.
The Amati name is huge.
So for generations, scholars and musicians would just pick their favorite from this list, They'd plant their flag and defend their chosen inventor to the bitter end.
And those debates raged endlessly.
Hmm.
And it was because of one fundamental, insurmountable problem.
Which was?
The material itself.
Right.
We are dealing with wood.
Oh, right.
When you are trying to trace an origin story from the early 1500s, wood is arguably the worst possible medium for maintaining a pristine historical record.
Because it just doesn't last.
Exactly. It's organic material. It decays over time. It gets devoured by woodworm and beetles.
Ah, the beetles.
Yeah, and it warps catastrophically in fluctuating humidity. I mean, if an instrument cracked or shattered during a performance...
Yeah, like a long carriage ride in the 16th century.
Exactly. It wasn't carefully archived for future historians.
No, it was thrown into the fireplace.
Exactly. It was kindling.
Wow. So it's not like studying ancient Greece or Rome where you have, marble statues and stone columns that just sit there.
Unchanged for millennia.
Yeah. Wood is fragile. Wood has a lifespan.
Precisely. And the instruments that miraculously did survive those early centuries, they present an entirely different problem for historians.
What's that?
They were constantly being modified.
Oh, interesting.
The violin you might see in a museum today that claims to be from, say, 1560,
Yeah?
it is almost certainly not in its original state.
Wait, really? Why would they change it?
Well, as music evolved in the 17th and 18th centuries, concert halls got bigger.
Okay, so orchestras got louder.
Exactly. Players needed their instruments to project more volume. So what did they do? They took these delicate 16th century instruments to later craftsmen who literally sawed off the original shorter necks.
No way. They just sawed them off.
Just sawed them right off. And they grafted on longer, more angled necks to increase the string tension.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and they swapped out the internal bass bars for thicker pieces of wood to handle that new tension. They changed the fingerboards.
That is wild. So even if you are holding a genuine 16th century violin in your hands today, you're essentially looking at a ship of Theseus.
That is the perfect analogy, yes.
You aren't looking at the original acoustics or the original setup that those first luthiers designed.
Not at all.
And, if the physical evidence is that compromised, you'd think we could just turn to the written records, right?
You'd hope so.
Just go to the library and read the 16th century treatises on instrument building.
But the written records from the early 1500s are notoriously, just infuriatingly vague.
How vague are we talking?
Well, the writers of the time didn't have standardized terminology. So they would describe an instrument as a fiddle or a viol or a lyra.
Okay.
But those terms were often used interchangeably for entirely different objects depending on the region you were in.
Oh, that's a nightmare.
It was an absolute taxonomical nightmare.
Which really begs the question, how do you study the evolution of something when the physical fossils have been altered or destroyed and the historical textbooks are basically written in riddles?
It's a huge challenge.
It feels like trying to map the entire evolutionary tree of the dinosaurs when all you have is one heavily glued together jawbone and a couple of vague journal entries from a 19th century explorer. You just don't have the skeleton.
That is the exact wall that traditional musicologists slammed into.
So how did they get around it?
It required a total paradigm shift in how we conduct historical research.
Okay.
The breakthrough came when modern historical detectives, specifically researchers like Carlo Bonetti, Emil Leip, Emanuel Winternitz, and David Boyden, enter the scene.
The heavy hitters.
Exactly. They realized that if the physical wood was gone and the words were unreliable, they had to look for a completely different kind of fossil record.
Like what?
Well, Emanuel Winternitz in particular, he was a brilliant curator of musical instruments at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. He had a revelation.
What did he figure out?
He realized that early 16th century Italian paintings were essentially the high-definition photographs of the era.
Oh, that is so clever. This is where the detective work gets incredibly cool.
It really does.
Because Winternitz didn't just walk into a gallery and look at any random painting of an angel holding a piece of wood, right?
No, not at all. He zeroed in specifically on the work of a northern Italian artist named Gaudenzio Ferrari.
Ferrari?
Yes. He lived from roughly 1480 to 1546. And the reason he focused on Ferrari is highly critical.
Why him?
Ferrari was not just a guy who knew how to mix pigments. He was the quintessential True Renaissance man.
Okay, so he did a bit of everything.
Exactly. He was a masterful painter, a skilled sculptor, a visionary architect. But the most important detail for our purposes,
Yeah.
Ferrari was an accomplished, practicing musician.
Ah.
Yes, Winternitz dug into the archives and proved that Ferrari was a recognized performer on stringed instruments like the lira and the lute.
That is huge. We really cannot overstate how important that detail is to the listener.
It changes everything.
Because think about it this way. If you ask an average artist to paint a complex piece of machinery that they don't actually understand, let's say the exposed inner workings of a modern jet engine,
Okay, right.
they're going to paint a generic impressionistic approximation.
A silver tube with some vague shapes.
Exactly. They'll paint a silver tube with fan-like shapes inside. It might look pretty, but it's mechanically useless.
Right.
But if you ask an aerospace engineer to paint that same jet engine, they are going to paint every single rivet, every hydraulic line, every turbine blade with absolute accuracy.
Because they understand the function of the machine.
Yes, because Ferrari was a musician, and very likely someone who built or at least maintained his own instruments. He approached painting bowed instruments with an engineer's eye.
Exactly. He understood the mechanics of how the strings sat on the bridge,
Right.
how the bow had to clear the edges of the wood, and where the sound holes needed to be. His art wasn't just decorative background filler for religious scenes.
It was rigorous mechanical documentation.
Yes. So Winternitz started analyzing Ferrari's body of work, looking for these fossilized instruments, so to speak.
What did he find?
The first major breakthrough is this stunning fresco called La Madonna degli Aranci, or the Madonna of the Orange Trees.
Great name.
It is. Ferrari painted this masterpiece between 1529 and 1530 on a wall in the Church of St. Christopher in Vercelli, which is a town situated about 40 miles west of Milano.
Okay, early 1500s, northern Italy.
Exactly. And right there, held by a cherub in this early 16th century painting, we see what scholars believe is the very earliest known visual depiction of a recognizable violin.
That is amazing. And he didn't stop with just one cherub, did he?
No, he didn't. A few years later, between 1535 and 1536, Ferrari takes on this monumental project.
Tell us about this one.
He paints a massive, breathtaking fresco up in the cupola of the Santuario in Sorano, another city near Milano.
Okay.
If you look up into this dome, the scene depicts the Mother Mary entering heaven, and she is accompanied by an absolute chaotic orchestra of angels.
An orchestra of angels. I love that imagery.
It's incredible. I'm talking about a swirling mass of 87 vividly painted angels.
87. That's a huge ensemble.
It is a dizzying piece of art.
Yeah.
And out of those 87 angels, 61 of them are actively playing or assisting in the playing of musical instruments.
61 out of 87.
Yes. It is basically a catalog of every instrument available in northern Italy at the time.
That's essentially a documentary at that point.
It really is. And because Ferrari's brushwork was so meticulous, Winternitz and Boyden were able to zoom in on this fresco and clearly identify not just early violins, but early forms of the viola and the cello being bowed by these angels.
But the real turning point for these researchers, according to Riley's book, is a secular painting by Ferrari, right? Known as Child with Viol.
Yes, that's the one.
Because when you first glance at it, the instrument the child is holding doesn't look exactly like a modern Stradivarius.
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't have that perfectly refined, elegant hourglass shape we know today. It's a bit clunkier. So why is this specific painting considered the smoking gun of the violin's origin?
Because it acts as the evolutionary missing link.
Okay, how so?
It bridges the gap between the older medieval stringed instruments and the modern violin family.
Right.
The instrument in Child with Viol is clearly a transitional prototype.
Right.
But it unambiguously possesses 4 highly specific, highly modern characteristics that define the violin family.
Okay, let's go through those. What's the first one?
First, it has exactly 4 strings.
Just 4.
Yes, which implies a very specific tuning system in fifths. Older instruments often had 3 or 5 or even drone strings that sat off the fingerboard.
Ah, okay. So it's streamlining the design. What's the second characteristic?
Second, it has a distinctively curved bridge.
A curved bridge. Why does that matter?
Well, a curved bridge allows a player to draw a bow across one single string at a time.
Oh, to play melodies.
Exactly. Rather than playing block chords like you would on a flatter bridge.
Okay, 4 strings, curved bridge. What are the other 2?
The third is the presence of F-holes.
What are F-holes?
Yes. Instead of a round hole in the center of the instrument like you see on a lute or an acoustic guitar.
Right.
It has 2 sound holes carved in the shape of a cursive letter F flanking the bridge.
Okay. And the fourth?
And fourth, It has a carved scroll at the very top of the neck, housing the tuning pegs in a peg box.
Let's actually pause on those F-holes for a second, because they are such an iconic visual, but I don't think most people understand why they exist.
Most people don't. They just think they look nice.
Exactly. The luthiers didn't just carve them in that elegant F shape because it looked pretty, right? There's a deep mechanical reason for it.
Absolutely. The F-hole is a stroke of acoustical genius.
Explain that for us.
So, older instruments, like the lute or the medieval viol, often had a central round rosette hole, sometimes intricately carved.
Like a modern acoustic guitar.
Right. But if you put a bridge directly over or near a massive hole in the center of the wood, you structurally weaken the very area that needs to support the immense downward pressure of the strings.
Oh, that makes total sense. You're putting all the weight on the weakest part.
Exactly. The F-hole solved this. By placing two narrow, curving slits on the sides of the bridge, you leave the central column of the wood structurally intact and strong.
So it doesn't collapse under the tension.
Right. But simultaneously, those curving slits free up the central mass of the wood to act like a speaker cone.
Oh, wow.
The belly of the violin can pump up and down freely, projecting sound outward with incredible force.
It's brilliant. It's like they engineered a mechanical amplifier. And what about the scroll at the top? Is that just decorative?
No, the scroll serves a crucial function too.
What does it do?
Beyond balancing the physical weight of the instrument in the player's hand, a scroll design means the tuning pegs are inserted laterally from the sides into a solid, hollowed-out peg box.
From the sides, okay.
This provides vastly superior friction and stability compared to older instruments where the pegs were pushed in from the front, or the front of a flat disc.
Oh, so they wouldn't slip as much.
Precisely. It allowed the strings to be tuned to a much higher, tighter tension without the pegs constantly slipping and going out of tune.
So when we look at Ferrari's child with viol, we are literally looking at a prototype.
We are.
It's an evolutionary stepping stone. And it makes me think of, how architecture evolves.
How so?
Well, you don't just build a towering Gothic cathedral overnight.
Right. Definitely not.
First, you build a simple stone arch. Then you experiment with ribbed vaulting. Then someone comes up with the flying buttress to support the walls.
And suddenly you can build higher.
Yes. And add massive stained glass windows. Northern Italy in the early 1500s was essentially a laboratory of luthiers building arches and buttresses.
That's a great way to look at it.
They were furiously testing different prototypes of the ultimate bowed instrument.
That is exactly what we're seeing in the multiplicity of shapes in Ferrari's paintings.
Yeah.
The ultimate violin design wasn't a sudden stroke of luck.
It was deliberate.
Highly deliberate.
Yeah.
It was the result of a deliberate, highly competitive quest by these makers across different Italian cities to achieve three very specific goals.
3 goals. Okay, what were they aiming for?
First and foremost, they needed greater acoustical potential. Orchestras and ensembles were growing, music was moving out of small private chambers into larger halls,
Right.
and they needed an instrument that was louder and projected more brilliantly than the older, quiet viols and rebecks.
They needed more horsepower.
Precisely.
Mm.
Second, they wanted a model that was aesthetically beautiful.
Because it's the Renaissance, after all.
Exactly. The visual harmony, the mathematics of the curves, the golden ratio, these things mattered deeply to the artists and patrons of the time. The instrument had to be a work of art in itself.
So sound, beauty, and what's the third?
And third, they needed an instrument that offered maximum ergonomic ease for the performer.
Ergonomics. That's so modern.
It was crucial. As composers started writing faster, more complex, virtuosic music, the musicians needed an instrument they could navigate nimbly.
Without fighting the physical shape of the wood?
Right.
So they're testing different woods, tweaking the arch of the belly, refining the fefle.
Constant experimentation.
And over time, the market, the gigging performers, and the wealthy buyers decided that the specific combination of the 4 strings, the F-holes, the scroll, and that elegant hourglass shape was simply the superior design for acoustics, aesthetics, and ergonomics.
It won the evolutionary race.
And the lesser prototypes were just abandoned and forgotten.
Yes. The definitive violin design evolved side by side with all these other experimental forms. It wasn't invented, right? It was refined through natural selection.
The clunkier shapes literally vanished from the historical record because performers stopped spending their money on them.
Exactly. Money talks, even in the Renaissance.
All right, so if we accept this organic evolutionary model happening over decades in northern Italy, we have to talk about the men who are actually wielding the chisels and saws.
We do. We have to reevaluate the timelines of our usual suspects.
Yes, because for the longest time, the established historical narrative, like the stuff printed as absolute fact in encyclopedias and taught in conservatories, was that Andrea Amati of Cremona was the humble apprentice of Gasparo da Sello of Brescia.
That was the accepted truth for centuries.
The story went that da Sello was the grand master who laid the groundwork, and Amati was the genius student who took his master's rough ideas and perfected them into the violin we know today.
It fit that clean narrative we talked about earlier. Master passes the torch to the student.
Right. But
Then Carlo Bonetti happened.
tell us about Carlo Bonetti.
He was an archivist who started actually digging into the dusty genealogical archives of Cremona. Bonetti published his explosive findings in 1938.
Wow, 1938.
Yeah, although it took a while for the wider musical world to really grasp the implications until David Boyden championed the research in the 1960s.
Okay, so what did Bonetti find?
Well, Bonetti bypassed the musical myths entirely. He went straight to the raw, boring municipal data, birth records, census data, and tax documents.
Or hard evidence.
Exactly. And he proved definitively that Andrea Amati was born much, much earlier than the history books claimed.
How much earlier?
Amati was born sometime between the years 1500 and 1511.
Okay, for you listening, keep that date in mind. 1500 to 1511. Now, when was his supposed master, Gasparo da Sello, born?
Gasparo da Sello wasn't born until 1540.
Which means the entire narrative collapses.
It's mathematically impossible.
Let's just do the basic math here. Amati was essentially a 30 to 40-year-old man, likely already running a successful workshop and producing instruments.
Right?
When his supposed master was literally an infant in a cradle.
Yes.
It is chronologically impossible for Amati to have been da Sello's apprentice.
Bonetti's archival work completely demolished that myth. It laid that mistaken relationship to rest once and for all.
So what does this timeline correction actually reveal?
It reveals that Amati, and almost certainly other unrecorded forgotten luthiers in Cremona and Brescia, were already deeply engaged in the active production of violins well before Gasparo da Sello even took his first breath.
Wow.
Now, this isn't to say da Sello wasn't important. He was a monumental master maker who contributed immensely to the development of the viola and the double bass. But he was unequivocally not the sole inventor of the family, nor was he Amati's teacher.
And what's even more thrilling is that the documentary evidence completely backs up this revised earlier timeline.
It does.
It's not just birth certificates. There is a paper trail of money that proves these instruments were out in the wild being played professionally much earlier than anyone thought.
Yes.
I want to talk about this ledger from the Treasury of Savoy in 1523.
This is a great piece of evidence. As is often the case in historical research, if you want to know what was really happening on the ground, you follow the money.
Always follow the money.
Right. In the official financial records of the Treasury of the Duchy of Savoy, dated precisely December 17, 1523, there is a mundane ledger entry recording a payment.
Okay.
The Treasury is paying a group of musicians for their services, and the specific word used to describe these musicians translates to violinists.
In 1523. And the geographic location of this gig is what makes this the ultimate puzzle piece for me. Where were these violinists providing their services?
In a town called Vercelli.
Vercelli. Now, if you are paying close attention to our detective story today, that name should ring a massive bell.
It absolutely should.
Vercelli is the exact same town, and specifically the same church, where Gaudenzio Ferrari painted La Madonna degli Aranci.
Exactly.
The fresco containing the very first known image of a proto-violin. And he painted that fresco between 1529 and 1530. That's just 6 or 7 years after these violinists were paid.
It is a staggering convergence of evidence.
It gives me goosebumps.
Right. You have an official government tax receipt proving that men identifying their profession specifically as violinists were being paid cold, hard cash to perform in a very specific town in 1523.
And in that very same town, in that exact same decade, a musician-painter observes them.
Studies their tools.
Yes, and paints the most mechanically accurate depiction of a proto-violin the world had yet seen.
It is brilliant historical triangulation. It proves beyond any shadow of a doubt that these instruments were not just experimental oddities sitting in a workshop somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
They were a finalized enough product to be actively gigged by professional musicians in northern Italy well before Amati or da Solo were producing their famous works.
And it all ties together perfectly when you look at the physical wood that did actually survive.
Yes, the physical evidence aligns too.
Because the source text notes that the earliest, extant meaning currently surviving and verified physical violin we have on record is an instrument made by a luthier named Peregrino Zanetto.
In Brescia.
Right, in Brescia. And it is dated 1532.
Which perfectly anchors the timeline we've just constructed.
Let's review that timeline.
The instrument emerges out of the experimental evolutionary soup in the early 1500s.
Okay.
By the 1520s, the design is solid enough that musicians are buying them and gigging with them, as shown by the Savoy tax document.
Right.
By the late 1520s, they are culturally significant enough to be painted by Ferrari in religious frescoes.
And then?
And by 1532, the physical manufacturing is in such full swing that one of the wooden specimens finally manages to survive the ravages of time to reach us today.
The Italian origin story, built on this multidisciplinary evidence, it's incredibly robust.
It's rock solid.
Okay, the Italian case is solid, but we can't ignore the elephant in the room. The Italians weren't the only ones claiming the crown of invention.
No, they were not.
What about the French contender? Let's talk about Gaspard de Wiefelproeckar from Lyon.
Ah, yes. The French contender.
For literally centuries, French scholars and writers fiercely defended his status as the true inventor of the violin.
They did, very passionately.
Émile Leip, who is a prominent researcher, wrote extensive, passionate defenses of Wiefelproeckar's sheer genius and the cultural influence of the city of Lyon on his craftsmanship. What was their proof?
Well, the French defense largely hinged on the fact that Wiefelproeckar was undeniably a highly talented, sought-after craftsman. He produced stringed instruments, primarily lutes and viols, of exceptional quality.
Nobody denies he was a great maker.
Right. But their main piece of visual proof is a very famous, highly detailed portrait of him, engraved by an artist named Pierre Warria in the year 1562.
Okay, 1562.
It's a classic piece of Renaissance self-promotion.
Like an early billboard.
Exactly. In this engraving, Wiefelproeckar is depicted as the Grand Master, surrounded by a massive, impressive collection of stringed instruments of all shapes and sizes. Lutes, massive viols.
Just showing off his inventory.
Very much so. And crucially, hanging on the wall behind him, two instruments that look suspiciously like early forms of the violin.
So he has his own visual evidence. He's got the engraving showing the instruments in his own shop. Why does the modern historical community reject his claim?
Well, because when researchers subjected that engraving and his legacy to the same rigorous scrutiny they applied to the Italians, three very damning factors emerged.
Ooh, okay. 3 factors.
Factors that completely unravel his claim to being the first maker of the modern violin.
What's the first factor?
The first factor comes down to looking closely at the specific instruments in that 1562 engraving.
The ones on the wall.
Right. Yes, they look like violins, but they're clearly precursors. One of them is a primitive, clunky alto or tenor instrument that looks almost exactly like the older prototypes painted by the Ferrari school in Italy 30 years earlier.
Oh.
They are not the fully realized, mathematically proportioned, modern violin model that Amati was already producing.
Okay, so his primary piece of visual proof is essentially just showing outdated prototypes that the Italians had already moved past.
Exactly. It's evidence of him experimenting, not inventing the final form.
What's the second factor?
The second factor is a matter of legacy. If he truly were the grand inventor who perfected the instrument, you would expect his specific design to have caught on and become the industry standard.
Right. Everyone would copy him.
But today, there is absolutely no extant pattern, template, or form known as the Wiefelproeckar models used by violin makers.
His designs didn't catch on.
His specific designs didn't survive that evolutionary format war we talked about. They were evolutionary dead ends.
And what is the third factor?
The third factor is the final nail in the coffin. Despite all the writings and defenses of his genius, there are zero, absolutely zero existing authentic violins, violas, or cellos made by Gaspard Wiefelproeckar anywhere in the world today.
0. Wow.
Zero. We have multiple authentic, verified instruments made by Andrea Amati sitting in museums.
Right.
We have authentic instruments made by Gasparo da Solo. We have absolutely nothing from Wiefelproeckar that fits the parameters of the modern violin family.
But didn't some instruments pop up later claiming to be his?
Yes, any Wiefelproeckar violins that surfaced in the 19th century were quickly proven to be outright forgeries.
Man. So To bring back our architecture analogy, Dufresne is the guy who commissioned a beautiful oil painting of himself standing in front of a pile of bricks,
Right.
claiming he invented the Gothic cathedral, but he never actually built a cathedral that didn't collapse. And we don't have a single stone left to prove he did.
Slightly harsh, but very accurate assessment.
He had fantastic marketing and PR, but his product simply didn't endure the test of time or the demands of the musicians.
Exactly. The physical and documentary evidence heavily favors northern Italy. However,
There's a however.
yes, we have to give the French credit for something equally important.
Okay, what do they do?
While they may not have won the physical format war of building the first violins, a Frenchman is actually the one responsible for finally giving us clarity in the written record.
Oh.
He is the one who finally organized the chaos.
Yes, let's talk about the textbooks, because the transition from the physical wood to the written page is fascinating.
It really is.
If you try to read the early Italian and German writers from the first half of the 16th century, it will make your head spin.
It's nearly impossible to parse.
Like scholars like Martin Agricola writing in 1528, or Giovanni Maria Lanfranco in 1533, or Silvestro Ganassi in 1542, they are maddeningly vague.
Very vague.
They dedicate pages to talking about 3-stringed instruments and then 4-stringed instruments. They make passing mentions that these instruments don't have frets on the fingerboard unlike the lute.
Which is an important detail, but still confusing.
Right. And they casually note they are tuned in intervals of fifths. But they never clearly define them as a unified, cohesive family. It's just a jumbled, confusing list of descriptions of various prototypes.
It was an absolute taxonomical nightmare. No one had established a standardized vocabulary for what these new instruments were or how they related to each other.
So who fixed it?
In 1556, a French musician and composer named Philibert Jean de Fer publishes a groundbreaking treatise called Epitome musicale.
Epitome musicale.
Yes, and he finally cuts through the fog. He lays it all out with absolute, undeniable clarity. He furnishes clear descriptions that definitely apply to the modern violin family.
Distinguishing them from the older stuff.
Exactly, distinguishing them entirely from the older family of viols. And most importantly, he gives specific French names and specific tunings for every single member of the violin family.
And he linked them to something specific, right?
Yes, he directly and intentionally linked them to the ranges of a human vocal choir.
This was a monumental shift in how the instruments were conceptualized. He wasn't just describing a bunch of different wooden boxes. He was describing a unified system.
A tree family.
Right. He called the highest soprano instrument the violin, the disu.
Yes.
The alto instrument, which we would think of as a small viola, he called the haute contra. The tenor instrument, a larger viola, was the tail. And the bass instrument, the cello, was the bass.
He completely mapped the wooden instruments directly onto the four parts of a vocal choir.
And by doing so, Jean de Fer cemented the idea that these instruments were not random, isolated experiments occurring in a vacuum.
Not at all.
They were a deliberate, interconnected family designed to work together to cover the entire spectrum of human hearing.
Specifically mimicking the depth, range, and expressiveness of a human vocal ensemble.
It standardized the concept of the string quartet before the string quartet even formally existed.
It is brilliant scholarship.
It is, though I have to point out my absolute favorite detail from Jean de Fer's 1556 book, because it shows just how wild the 16th century really was.
The tuning instructions.
Yes, he provides practical instructions for the musicians on how to tune these instruments. And we have to keep in mind, this is centuries before anyone had a digital tuner app on their phone.
Or even a standardized tuning fork.
Right, where everyone agreed that A universally equals 440 hertz. Pitch wasn't a scientific constant, it was completely relative.
Completely relative to the ensemble.
And Jean de Fer literally writes in his treatise that you should take the top string, the thin E string, and turn the tuning peg to tighten it, quote, as high as you dared.
As high as you dared.
And then he casually assures the player, now then, you are in tune if your string does not break.
It is an astonishing, almost comical piece of advice to read today.
It's hilarious, but it tells you so much about the chaotic, visceral, unstandardized nature of 16th century music. Let's remember what these strings were made of.
Not high tensile steel.
No, or synthetic nylon. They were made of sheep gut.
Yes.
They literally took the intestines of a sheep, washed them, stretched them out, twisted them together, and dried them.
Which means they were incredibly unstable.
These gut strings were incredibly sensitive to temperature, to humidity, to the sweat on a player's hands. So you didn't tuned to a piano.
Yeah.
You just cranked the wooden peg, listened to the sheep gut stretching and groaning, prayed it didn't suddenly snap and whip you in the eye.
Real hazard of the job.
And once it was as tight as it could physically handle, you looked at the rest of the band and said, all right, guys, this is our pitch for the night. Let's play.
It really highlights how much we take modern technological standardization for granted. They were working entirely within the physical limits of their organic materials. The structural integrity of the gut string dictated the pitch of the entire ensemble, not some arbitrary mathematical frequency handed down by a committee. It was a deeply physical, tactile relationship with sound.
Okay, so we've established that the instruments evolved organically and together in northern Italy. We've successfully debunked the Amati and De Salo apprentice smith with hard tax data.
Right.
And we've seen how the French written record finally caught up and categorized them as a vocal family. But now we have to clear the floor.
It's time for the big one.
We have to tackle the ultimate throwdown, the heavyweight fight of musicology, the debate that has caused actual shouting matches at academic conferences.
Yes. Did the viola precede the violin?
Was the viola the parent of the entire family?
This is a debate that has raged for a very, very long time.
Yeah.
And when you look at the surface-level arguments, it is incredibly easy to see why.
Why is that?
For generations, the general consensus, the absolute orthodox view among scholars, was unequivocally yes. The viola came first. It was the original template, and the smaller violin and the larger cello were later derived from it. And there are four classic, heavily cited, seemingly unbreakable pillars of argument that support this viola-first theory.
Let's lay those four traditional pillars out on the table so we can understand the conventional wisdom before we tear it down.
Let's do it.
Argument number one is all about the supposed ancestor. The theory goes that a very specific 15th century instrument called the Lira da Braccio is the chief direct ancestor of the violin family.
Right.
And because the Lira da Braccio has F-holes, and its general size and body shape roughly match the modern viola, the viola must have been the first logical step in the evolution.
This argument relies incredibly heavily on the drawings and descriptions found in Michael Praetorius's famous encyclopedic book from 1618, Syntagma Musicum.
Right. So that's the first pillar. Argument number two focuses entirely on musical demand, essentially market forces.
Exactly.
The theory states that early 16th century music was primarily polyphonic vocal music, choirs singing multiple overlapping lines. The primary function of early instruments was simply to match and support those human voices.
They were accompaniment.
Because the alto and tenor voices in the middle of the choir were considered the most crucial foundational parts for accompanying the singers, the alto tenor instrument, which is exactly what the viola is, would naturally have been the very first instrument the luthiers focused all their energy on creating to meet that overwhelming market demand.
That makes perfect logical sense. Market demand drives the product development. You build what the gigging musicians need to get hired.
Exactly. Okay, pillar number three is all about the words etymology, the linguistic argument.
The strongest one for a lot of people.
Yeah. The word viola is the root Italian word. From there, you get all the derivatives. You take viola, you add a diminutive suffix in Italian, and you get violino, which literally translates to small viola.
Right.
You take viola, add an augmentative suffix, and you get violone, meaning large viola or bass. And then violoncello means small bass viol.
It's all based on viola.
So linguistically speaking, if the word for violin literally means small viola, the viola must have physically existed first to be the naming baseline. You can't have a small viola if the standard viola doesn't exist yet.
The linguistic argument is incredibly persuasive because it relies on the very structure of language.
And finally, argument number four is the physical evidence, the absolute trump card for the viola defenders.
The physical inventory.
Yes. When we look in the museums, the vaults, and the private collections around the world today, there are simply far more 16th century violas alive and intact than there are 16th century violins or cellos.
The sheer survival rate seems to suggest they were the predominant original instrument being mass-produced.
Okay, four massive, imposing pillars supporting the idea that the viola is the parent of the family, the Lira da Braccio ancestor, the choir's musical demand, the etymology of the word, and the overwhelming physical evidence.
It looks like an open and shut case.
It really does.
No.
But here is where the modern counter-investigation by researchers like Boyden and Winternitz comes in like a wrecking ball.
They took these four pillars and systematically, ruthlessly dismantled them.
Let's start by looking closer at the first one, the Lira da Braccio ancestor theory. Let's talk about what that instrument actually was.
Right. When you actually look closely at the physical mechanics of the Lyra da Braccio, the direct linear connection to the viola isn't nearly as clean as Praetorius made it seem in his 1618 drawings.
Why not?
First of all, the Lyra da Braccio is often somewhat leaf-shaped, and it had a wide, flat
A
bridge.
flat bridge.
Right, which we talked about earlier. A flat bridge is designed so the player can bow multiple strings at once to play chords, which was its primary function as an accompanying instrument.
Oh, right. Whereas the violin family specifically evolved a distinctly curved bridge to play single soaring melodic lines.
Exactly.
And what about the F-holes? The argument says the lira had them, so it's the parent.
That's a vast overgeneralization. Not all Lyra da Braccios had F-holes.
They didn't?
No. Some had C-shaped holes, some had elaborate rosettes, some had completely different sound hole shapes entirely.
Okay, that pokes a hole in that theory.
Secondly, Boyden correctly pointed out that the lyra wasn't the only ancestor floating around. The violin evolved from a complex synthesis of several different instruments, including the three-stringed rebec and the Renaissance fiddle.
It wasn't a straight line from one single parent?
But most importantly, the size argument completely falls apart upon closer inspection.
Why does the size argument fail?
Because while some surviving lyras were indeed the size of a modern viola, many of them were much smaller.
How small?
In fact, many of them measured only about 38 centimeters, or roughly 15 inches, in length.
Wait, 15 inches? That is almost exactly the dimension of a standard full-size violin.
Exactly. The Lyra da Braccio's tuning, its physical dimensions, and its string length equate just as easily to the violin as they do to the viola.
So you absolutely cannot use it as definitive, exclusive proof that the viola's shape and size was born first. It's a shared ancestor, not a direct parent.
Precisely. It's
Yeah.
a shared ancestor.
Boom. Strike one for the orthodox theory. What about the second argument? The idea that there was an overwhelming musical demand for the alto tenor voice to support the choir, meaning luthiers would build the viola first.
Boyden and Winternitz challenged this premise through exhaustive deep-dive research into the actual musical practices and scores of the time.
What did they find in the scores?
Yes, it is true that a main function of early stringed instruments was to double or accompany singing parts in a supportive role. But there's absolutely zero evidence in the musical treatises or the surviving sheet music that the musical demands of the early 16th century prioritized the alto or tenor ranges over the soprano or bass ranges.
Because a choir doesn't work that way.
Right.
A choir needs all its parts supported simultaneously to maintain the harmonic balance.
Precisely. If a wealthy church or a noble court commissioned a luthier to build instruments to accompany their choir, they wouldn't just say, invent an alto instrument for us and we'll come back in 10 years for the soprano.
The demand was for the entire ensemble to be supported at once.
Exactly. The luthiers were developing the soprano, alto, tenor, and bass instruments concurrently to meet the holistic demand of the music.
Strike two. Okay, but you can't argue with the dictionary, can you? This is one that always stumped me. Argument three, the etymology. Violino literally translates to small viola. Doesn't that just end the debate right there?
The linguistic derivatives make perfect, undeniable logical sense in modern Italian. But there is a massive historical blind spot in that argument.
What's on the blind spot?
In the early 16th century, the word viola wasn't a specific trademark term for the alto tenor instrument we know today.
It wasn't.
No, viola was a generic blanket stem word used across Italy for essentially all bowed string instruments.
Ooh.
It applied to members of the new violin family and the older fretted viol family. It basically just translated to a thing you play with a bow.
Ah, okay, I have an analogy for this. This is exactly like how in certain parts of the American South, people use the word Coke to refer to literally any carbonated soda.
It's a perfect comparison.
You can go to a restaurant, ask the waiter for a Coke, and they will say, sure, what kind? Sprite, Dr. Pepper, root beer. Coke is just the generic baseline word for the entire category of drinks.
That is a phenomenal way to think about it. It perfectly illustrates the linguistic trap.
Wow.
Because viola was just the generic stem word for the entire category of bowed instruments, the fact that the alto tenor member of the family eventually retained the original root name doesn't prove it was physically built first.
It just ended up keeping the generic family surname, so to speak.
Exactly. While the other instruments in the family eventually got suffixes to describe their relative sizes. The soprano instrument became the small viola, the bass became the large violin.
So the name alone is just a linguistic quirk. It is not proof of chronological precedence in the workshop.
Exactly. Strike three.
Strike three, that is so satisfying to unravel. Which brings us to the fourth and final argument, the physical evidence.
The survival rates.
The undeniable fact that there are more surviving 16th century violas in museums today than there are violins or cellos. And I have to admit, when I first read the source material, I thought, well, you can't argue with physical inventory. The numbers are the numbers.
It's hard to argue with a physical object in a museum.
But then I read the counter-argument, and it was a massive, mind-bending aha moment for me.
It's a great twist.
Because if the viola was truly the most popular, most beloved, most fiercely played instrument of the 16th century, shouldn't there actually be fewer of them left today? Because they would have been played to death.
You've just hit on one of the most fascinating paradoxes in all of historical research.
Survivorship bias.
Survivorship bias. It is a brilliant counterintuitive deduction. The violas from the 16th century didn't survive in greater numbers because they were the most important or the most popular.
Right.
They survived in pristine condition precisely because they were used less.
This is completely mind-blowing. Let's unpack the implications of that. Why were they used less? Was the music just boring?
Well, it comes down to a massive shift in musical tastes and critically human ergonomics.
Okay, let's start with musical tastes.
As we moved out of the Renaissance and into the Baroque era of the 17th and 18th centuries, the musical landscape changed dramatically.
How so?
Composers like Vivaldi and Corelli started favoring the soaring, virtuosic, highly technical melodies of the violin and the driving, rhythmic bass lines of the cello.
So the outside voices.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The middle voices, the violas, became far less prominent in the trio sonatas and orchestral works of the time. They were relegated to filling out the harmony. Because they were simply needed less, they were played less. And because they were played less, they suffered far less wear and tear.
Far less acidic sweat from the player's hands.
Exactly. And far fewer accidental drops than the violins that were being constantly gigged and traveled with.
But it's not just that they fell out of fashion or got boring to play, right? It's why they were so hard to play. This is where the human element really enters the story.
It is.
The sources note that many of these surviving 16th century violas were specifically tenor violas. What does that actually mean in terms of physical size and human anatomy?
This is the crux of the survivorship bias. In the 16th century, luthiers were building violas in two distinct sizes to cover the inner harmonies, the smaller alto viola and the much larger tenor viola.
How large is much larger?
When I say larger, I mean these tenor violas were massive. They could be up to 18 or 19 inches in body length.
Just to give people listening a reference, a standard modern full-size violin is about 14 inches. Trying to hold a 19-inch wooden box under your chin sounds like a medieval torture device.
They were incredibly bulky, heavy, and physically demanding to hold up. Remember, these instruments were meant to be played on the arm or shoulder.
Right.
Which is why the entire family was broadly referred to as Viola da Braccio, meaning arm violins, to distinguish them from the Viola da Gamba, which were played between the legs.
So they're holding this huge thing up on their arm.
Yes. Over time, as music became faster, more complex, and required shifting the left hand up and down the neck with incredible speed, these massive tenor violas became a severe physical liability to the performer.
They were just too difficult, too heavy, and too painful to play for long periods.
They caused immense arm fatigue and shoulder strain.
So you have these incredibly beautiful, meticulously crafted, highly expensive instruments, but because they were physically exhausting to play, and because the musical tastes of the composers shifted away from the tenor voice anyway, these instruments were just packed away.
Exactly. They were functionally obsolete.
Wow.
So wealthy patrons packed them away in dark, climate-stable closets. They were stored in the attics of noble houses, or they were hung on the walls simply as silent, decorative antiques.
So they were safe.
They survived in absolutely pristine condition for centuries in the dark, safely avoiding the rosin dust, the humidity of concert halls, the travel across bumpy roads, and the careless accidents that utterly destroyed their smaller, more nimble violin counterparts.
That is the ultimate historical twist. They survived because they were an ergonomic failure.
Yes.
They were a slight evolutionary dead end in terms of how they interacted with the human body. And the source material mentions a really tragic coda to this story, too.
Oh, it is heartbreaking for historians.
Many of these beautifully preserved 16th century tenor violas only re-entered the active musical world much later in the 19th century when future luthiers or aggressive restorers found them, realized they were too big for modern players, and literally took saws to them.
Just cut them down.
They cut down the wood, reshaped the bouts, and permanently altered these historical artifacts just to shrink them down to a more convenient, playable alto size.
Which is an absolute tragedy for museum curators and preservationists today, but it is a powerful testament to how ruthless and practical musicians actually are.
If a tool doesn't work for the human body, it gets modified or abandoned.
Exactly. The sheer survivorship of the large 16th century viola is almost entirely due to this ergonomic failure, not because it was the glorious original pioneer of the violin family.
That completely flips the entire Orthodox narrative upside down and shakes it out. It's not proof of precedence, it's proof of obsolescence.
That's a great way to put it.
The viola didn't come first, it just got benched during the big game so it didn't get muddy.
Exactly.
So where does this leave us in the grand conclusion of our detective story?
Well, if we synthesize everything, all the meticulous pictorial evidence extracted from Ferrari's frescoes,
The 61 Angels.
the hard documentary evidence from the Savoy treasury ledgers,
Follow the money.
the totally debunked timelines of Amati and de Solo, and finally, the systematic deconstruction of the viola's precedents and the revelation of its survivorship bias.
When you put all of that together,
A very clear, deeply human picture emerges. There was no spontaneous genesis. There was no single lightning bolt of genius that created the violin or the viola as an isolated, perfect instrument overnight.
instead it was a messy, living ecosystem.
Precisely. The violin, the viola, and the cello all evolved together as a cohesive, interdependent family of instruments.
All at the same time.
Yes. This evolution began organically around or shortly before the year 1500, predominantly in the workshops of northern Italy. It was a gradual, highly collaborative process of trial and error.
Testing and retesting.
Multiple luthiers across different cities, including Andrea Amati and eventually Gasparo de Salo, experimented with different woods, different archings, and different dimensions.
And they were all chasing those same three goals, right?
Yes, they were all collectively chasing the same three goals. Maximum acoustic power to fill larger rooms,
Visual beauty to satisfy Renaissance aesthetics.
and ease of playing to accommodate human hands. Over several decades of relentless iteration, they refined these varied forms until the ideal model, the lasting, acoustically perfect format of the violin family we know today, finally solidified and won out over all the other prototypes.
It really fundamentally reshapes how you view the concept of innovation.
It does.
We are so culturally conditioned to want the hero story, the lone genius in a garage or a workshop who changes the world in a single afternoon.
It's a very compelling myth.
But true innovation is almost rarely a solo act. It is a messy, sprawling, collaborative evolution driven by art, by economics, by the physical limits of organic materials like wood and sheep gut, and by the immediate practical needs of the human beings using the tools.
Exactly.
It took painters observing mechanics, tax collectors recording mundane gig payments, composers demanding more volume, and rival craftsmen all bouncing ideas off each other to finally give the world the violin.
And it's worth noting, it took modern historians willing to step outside the traditional, rigid bounds of their own field to figure it out.
That's a great point. They couldn't just look at the old textbooks.
No, they had to stop just reading music treatises and start looking at fine art, at municipal economics, and at human anatomy to finally piece that true story together.
Knowledge is always most valuable when we question our baseline assumptions and actively connect the dots across vastly different disciplines.
Absolutely.
Which leaves me with a final, slightly provocative thought for you to mull over today as we wrap up this deep dive.
Oh, let's hear it.
We've just spent all this time exploring how the violin family evolved specifically to meet the acoustic potentials, the aesthetic tastes, and the physical ergonomic needs of the 16th century human body and the Renaissance concert hall.
Right.
So how will the digital and electronic instruments of our current era physically evolve over the next 500 years?
That is a wild thought.
Right. As our relationship with technology, artificial intelligence, and spatial sound changes, what will the perfected instruments of the year 2500 actually look like?
Will they even have a physical shape?
Exactly. Will they even be physical objects we hold, or will they be neurological interfaces? And perhaps more amusingly, will future historians in the 26th century, trying to piece together the murky origins of the modern synthesizer or the digital audio workstation, have to frantically scroll through our archived, compressed Instagram feeds?
Just looking for clues in the background of selfies.
Yes, doing it the exact same way Emanuel Winternitz had to stare up at Gaudenzio Ferrari's fresco of 87 angels.
It's a deeply fascinating parallel. The medium of the art changes, and the technology advances, but the fundamental nature of historical detective work remains exactly the same. We're always just looking for the fossilized footprints of human ingenuity.
Something to think about the next time you post a casual picture of your guitar or your MIDI keyboard online. You might just be leaving a crucial, confusing fossil for a future historian.
Very true.
Thank you so much for joining us on this intellectual journey today. Keep questioning those clean, simplistic narratives, keep looking for the beautifully messy truths behind them, and keep diving deep into the fascinating, complex histories hidden inside the everyday objects all around you. Until next time, stay curious.